Good day, everyone, and welcome to this new edition of XBRL Direction webinars. My name is Catalina Ibañez Gutierrez. I am the chair of the Implementation Awareness Task Force Working Group of XBRL International. I am a senior consultant at LookAnet. And the topic of our webinar from today is Calculation 1.1. In this 30-minute session, we will explore the latest advancements in XBRL calculation functionality and release of Calculation 1.1, designed for taxonomy authors, software developers, regulators, and reporting professionals. This webinar will deliver a clear and focused introduction to the key updates in Calculation 1.1 and outline the recommended path of adaptation. Calculation 1.1 is important for XBRL reporting because it significantly improves the accuracy, clarity, and reliability of reported data. It is our privilege to host an expert in the field, Paul Beckman, co-chair of the Taxonomy Design Working Group of XBRL International and senior consultant at LookAnet. Thank you, Paul, for joining us today. And our moderator, Thomas Verdi, member of the Implementation Awareness Task Force, chair of XBRL Europe, and managing director of BMA Advisory and RegTech. Thank you, Thomas, for joining us today. So if you have questions, please use the Q&A option. This is under, and you see this option under. And at the end of the webinar, we will have time for answering them. So, Paul, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Catalina. As you might guess, we will talk about Calculations 1.1 today. I will start with a brief explanation of what exactly calculation is. I will speak about the big upgrades Calculations 1.1 brings with it, and I will speak about the scope of Calculations 1.1. Calculations in XBRL are in the end defined in the summation item arc role in the XBRL specification. But in easier words, a calculation is the relationship between concepts, and they describe and validate simple totals and subtotals in our reports. And if there's some inconsistency inside these calculations, an error message is raised, and we all might have seen them before. Calculations, according to Calculations 1.0 approach, were just a simple total in the end. So it was something like A plus B minus C equals D. But with Calculations 1.1, the approach changed a little bit to make it proper and to get rid of some background noises, so to say. And in the end, what we have to do now with Calculations 1.1 is we have for each data point that is reported, we have to create a contribution interval. The next step we have to do for all elements of a calculation, we have to sum up those contribution intervals to create the calculated total interval. And in addition to that, we also have to create an interval for the total fact value and get the reported total interval with that. To check if the calculation actually sums up in the end, we have to overlap those two intervals, so the calculated total interval and the reported total interval. And if we can see an overlap, the calculation is fine, it is consistent, and no error message is raised. Another thing calculations do is they check for the consistency of reported facts over the whole report. To get into an example, we can look at this table, this consolidated income statement here, where we have our gross profit loss calculation, which is the sum of the sales and the cost of sales. I marked them here in yellow and pink. The pink one is our total fact value, and the yellow marked elements are in the end our data points, so our values that are part of the calculation, and for them we later on have to create the contribution intervals. But as you can see in this view, the numbers are not complete. They are all reported in thousands, so we have to think, we have to add 3 zeros to get the actual reported number, which is still rounded. There are other calculations on this page. There are other calculations in the report. And to get a little bit better overview, we can always go to the calculation link base, for example, where we can see all calculations going on in a report. Again, you can see the yellow and the pink marked lines and values here. We can see all the tags that are part of calculations. We can see the weight and the element type they have. And here we can see the whole value or the whole number that is part of the calculation, so including the 3 zeros that have been cut before in the fancy looking report. So the big upgrade calculations 1.1 brings with it is about the rounding. Calculations 1.0 did not take the reported accuracy effects into account. That means if the report is presented or reported in thousands, millions, and whatsoever, there might be rounding errors popping up in the report. And calculations 1.0 had the approach, if the calculated value and the reported value don't match up, you get an error message. With the calculations 1.1 approach, this will change. Another thing calculations 1.0 was not capable of was checking for duplicate facts. So if different or the same value has been reported for one use tag over the whole report. Before, there were no error messages coming up. With calculations 1.1, this will change as well. So going back to our example, I just put in the previous year data for sales, cost of sales, and gross profit in this table. According to calculations 1.0, what was happening before is sales and cost of sales were summed up. We get a new value. It looks like this. And as you can see, the calculated value is bigger than the reported value. And according to calculations 1.0, this will cause an error message. With the new calculations 1.1 approach, we now have to look at the intervals, so the contribution intervals and the reported total intervals. To create these intervals, we again have to look into the report how the values are reported. These numbers are rounded to thousands, so we work with plus minus 500 and add or subtract them from the reported values. If the report would have been in millions, we would work with plus minus 500,000, for example. This means adding the intervals, we will get this view. So some more values, and in the next step, we have to create the calculated total interval. So again, we add up the values we have for sales and cost of sales. And the last step we have to do now to check if the calculation is consistent according to calculations 1.1, we have to check if there's an overlap between the reported total and the calculated interval. What we can see, the reported total value is part of the calculated interval, which is always a good sign. And if we compare the reported total interval and the calculated interval, we can see they are overlapping, which means, according to calculations 1.1, the calculation is fine. There's no error message popping up, as it is most likely a rounding error here. So you can see it makes our lives a lot easier using calculations 1.1, as rounding errors happen in our reports or happen in reports, and happen in reports. Period. We are speaking about calculations 1.1. It's not all set up. There are still some things calculations 1.1 is not capable of doing, or as it is not a complete solution. It does not support cross-dimensional calculations, for example. Cross-period calculations aren't supported as well. And things that still can happen are report-wide calculation errors. This is something calculations 2.0 might tackle at some point in time, but as of now, there's nothing we are capable of doing. XBRL International highly recommends to migrate to calculations 1.1 as soon as reasonably possible. There are several reasons to do so, but if we look at the graph on this slide, we can see the main reason for it, the count of calculation inconsistencies. Out of 3,000 ESEF reports that have been checked with calculations 1.0, there have been roughly 18,000 inconsistencies detected. With calculations 1.1, we've been below 3,000 inconsistencies for the same reports, which just shows that the huge decrease we have here is really something that helps everyone involved. The preparers, the auditors, the regulators have to check less error messages in the end. And as soon as you publish your report and other people want to look at it, I can just guess, of course, as that's nothing I do. But if I have two reports in front of me and one has way less inconsistencies and error messages than the other, I would always check the one with less error messages, as I expect a higher data quality, for example. Everything I've been talking about, you can find on the XBRL International website. We have, you can find the guidance, so adapting calculations 1.1 there, and you can find a blog post called calculations 1.1, getting rid of the noise. That's actually it from my side here. So let's see if there are any questions.
We get one question. Thank you, Paul, for this presentation. We get one question from the audience, but we also have some questions that we prepared to complete this presentation. So I switch between the different lists. And maybe we can start with a general question because this is a new specification and new version 1.1. But this is clear that for the standards is new, but what are the actions that are required from the users and also the auditors regarding the implementation of calculation 1.1?
I think they have to look at the same things everyone has to look at when you implement something. You have to clarify, for example, the expectations and responsibilities on both sides. You have to make sure that the software you are using is capable of performing calculations 1.1. And yeah, for example, if those parts are all given, you can consider moving on with calculations 1.1.
Okay, thank you. And by the way, was it called 1.1? And because we also have sometimes some people speak about calculation 2.0. You spoke about calculation 2.0. So why this 1.1 so far?
I think as discussed before, there have been just, let's call it minor updates coming from calculations 1.0. So we are now capable of avoiding rounding issues. But as I said, there are still some things going on in the calculations that are not being, that calculations 1.1 is not capable of doing. And this is something a potential calculations 2.0 or whatever number you want to give might tackle.
Okay, and maybe I can switch to the question or one question of the audience now, which is about this rounding change that you just explained. And the question from Sean is, know that this system would allow rounding in the total. That may create less precision. So the question is, with calculation 1.1, is it still possible to have multiple states of results, explaining that if there is still a small difference or rounding difference, or any warning or error will disappear using calculation 1.1, if I understand well the question asked by the audience.
So with calculation 1.1, of course, not every error will disappear. So if there's actually a calculation error in the report, this will still pop up. But most likely everything around the everything involving a rounding issue will be clear of error messages.
Okay, and is it something that is based on the taxonomy? What is the link between a taxonomy and a calculation specification?
I mean, at least for the latest IFRS taxonomy and for the latest ESEF taxonomy, there is a connection inside the taxonomy to the calculations 1.1. So at least from a taxonomy side, it is highly recommended to use calculations 1.1.
And it's not only taxonomies, because calculation 1.1 is also a topic that has been a question that has been really important for ESEF filings, because in the ESMA reporting manual for ESEF, calculation 1.1 was mentioned. So can you explain a bit to us how it is related and how the reporting manual should enforce the calculation 1.1 use?
To my understanding, there are multiple steps that have to be taken to actually integrate calculation 1.1 in the ESEF reporting. One is, of course, the reporting manual, but the other step would be the RTS and, of course, the legal basis. And if this is if this is included there and so to say ready to go, of course, then we can continue to use calculations 1.1. But in the end, this is still, at least for this reporting season, so the last one, this is something that was up to the companies, the auditors, and the regulators to discuss how to approach, as it was not completely clear all over Europe.
Yeah, in my experience of chair of XBRL Europe, we know that there have been different interpretations between the countries, especially because the reporting manual was switching to calculation 1.1, but many states with the previous taxonomy, ESEF 22. I think that next year, or for the financial statement of 2025, that will be much clearer, because taxonomy ESEF 24 and calculation 1.1 will be fully aligned, so there will be no more questions. Even the transition has been a bit hectic depending on the countries. Maybe one question, because people are sometimes expecting a lot, and it's also related to the ESEF reporting manual, about calculation and improvement of calculation. We learned from you that calculation 1.1 was solving the problem about the rounding, but what about the calculations between two different periods? For example, in the cash flow calculations, where you have the end of the year cash and cash equivalent, and beginning of the next year cash and cash equivalent, is or the variation between the two. Is this covered by calculation 1.1, or is it still not covered by calculation so far?
This is not included at the moment. This is something calculation 2.2 or 2.0, sorry, might tackle, or something in between. I mean, if you see a need for this, I think you can always send a nice email to XBRL International and ask them to include it. But I guess someone is already looking into it and working on it. as our standard is always.
Yeah, I understood that calculation 2.0 was considering this, because this is I need, at least auditors are requesting, but maybe that helps me to switch to a question we had from the audience. I don't know exactly, because it's a really short question, so I don't know if I understand it well, but and don't hesitate to ask more questions if answer is not answering to what you really had in mind. But is the reported fact value relevant at all, or to check the consistency? Probably, I don't know if it's about why we report both the different items in the summation and the sum. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
I mean, the reported fact value is still relevant, and this is the basis for the whole calculation process. So without a reported value, there can't be any calculation set up. And without a reported value, we are not able to work with our intervals and perform our calculations 1.1 approach. So the reported fact value will still be relevant, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with you, because when you audit some files, yes, of course, it's a double check that everything is consistent, but it's what give you also a sort of guarantee that you have the numbers that you wanted to communicate, or you know about the numbers. Another question that just popped up, and thank you for asking all those questions today. Where we create calculations on a table, we often can tag the calc by individual rows or as a sum of a lesser number of subtotals. Choosing the many option will give us much wider total interval. Do you propose a best practice guidance? I understand it's when you have different calculations or subcalculation going to the total, what will be the interval?
I mean, in the end, if you have a bigger interval, the possibility to get an error message overlapping it with a reported total interval will be bigger. So more numbers creates a bigger interval, and the possibility to get an error message should decrease. If I understand the question correct, I'm not completely sure, to be honest.
Okay. But yes, when we have multiple calculation, it's applied to give if it's different rounding and it's accepted as a rounding. I understood from my understanding as a user that we will not have an error, which also, okay, you don't have the information about the rounding, or at least you don't have automatically the rounding messages. It's still possible to generate them with any checking system, but it also allows to focus on the real errors, where it's not a problem of rounding, but a problem of consistency and real consistency on the reported values. And so that's why it's important to see that. I have so far no more other questions. I don't know if in the audience I give you a few more seconds to type your questions if you want. Otherwise, I think we had presentation and discussion about calculation 1.1, and I hope we clarified the topic.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Also, brevity is also answering the question on the background.
Okay.
So thank you for that. So thank you very much again, Paul and Thomas, for your presentation, for the moderation, and for the answers. I think we are aware of the relevance of calculation 1.1 to get rid of the noise. And so thank you very much to you audience for joining us today. And for your questions, of course, that's really nice. So see you at the next direction webinar. I wish you a wonderful day.